I call them dead bodies, is I've had a lot of misfires down the road. There's a lot of litter on my journey that I had ideas and they didn't work. As a matter of fact, my first venture into the entrepreneurial world when I was only 23, and I was working in an agency. We're doing a lot of television commercials, and the guys I was working with over a couple of years convinced me that we could start our own film company.
Welcome to Reach. This is a show for podcasters who are not only trying to grow an amazing show, but they actually want to make money. I'm excited to share with you the secrets that I've learned along the way, as well as introduce you to some amazing guests who are going to really help you take your show to the next level. I'm your host, Brunson Smith. Let's dive in. All right, folks, welcome back onto the show. Today we have Angelo Ponzi, who is a fractional CMO. Angelo, do you want to tell folks a little bit what you do and how you got into it?
Sure. Thank you. And glad to be here and talking to your audience. It's a long career, and I spent a lot of time in the advertising agency business. Actually had my own for a while, a lot of time in the research business. And on the flip side, a lot of time on the client side. And the area that I really felt that I really loved doing was the strategic side. So I was actually, give you the end of the story. I'm working for a company. I'm in about 2.5 years. They sold. The new CEO was standing giving a presentation about the future of the company and all that stuff. And I noticed that my division was not on the board. And so when I challenged him about it, I watched him, do a song and dance about how we were buried under this. And I just came back and I said, okay, I'm done with the corporate world. I'm going back out and start this business. And that's what I did 10 years ago. I just actually in April was 10 years. And I'd, done it before a couple of times. And so I wasn't afraid to do it. But then the decision is, how do you structure it? Do you go back and be an agency? And, I can't throw a stone without hitting a digital agency these days. Right. So I felt where are the gaps, and the gaps were on the strategic side. And so that's where I focused. And that's actually my strength. So
that's amazing. What is the value of focusing on strategy over tactics? And why? Where did you develop that philosophy?
It's actually been ingrained in me throughout my career. I was always that guy working on strategy and using market research to gather insights. And I found over the years that anytime we did not do that, we would get off kilter. Is an example. I was working in the wine industry, and the brand was changing their whole positioning to a coastal brand, if you will. Well, that made a lot of sense. We're here in Southern California. We'll show the beach, we'll show the ocean, and blah, blah, blah. So we took our first concepts and we hesitated just before we were ready to present, and we decided to go test them. And the testing showed that it would have failed miserably. Why? Because the way we speak about the beach and the ocean is not how somebody in Michigan thinks or upstate New York thinks about water and coast, right? They're different. We got bodies of lake, we got different parts. And so we found that whole concept of just using that water and kind of relaxing, it just didn't work. And so that showed us that, once again, reinforced my belief that you really got to understand. I was working for a large banking institution out of New York. We were doing copy testing for their commercials. And they tested 3 of the 4 commercials. And the testing showed they could make some tweaks. But the 4th one, they said, we just learned enough information. We don't need to spend the money to do the 4th. And at the end of the day, the 4th one did not perform as well as the first 3. And so I tell clients, I appreciate, what you've done. I appreciate what you think. But at the end of the day, you're not buying your own products and services. And so we need to understand what the market thinks, because you think you're something. I can tell you in most situations, when I go into the market and ask your customers, they don't think the same way you do. And so there's gaps in messaging and thinking and positioning, maybe even product solutions. And so that just continually reinforces that this is the right way to go. And, I stand behind that. And I get calls that say, no, we just need, a social media campaign or a new website. And my answer is, if you don't go through this process, I'm not sure I can help. What am I doing? What am I writing to them? It's regurgitating the same stuff you've already got there. And so go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that. I've interviewed a lot of people in my life, and one of the first interviews I did, I was pretty young, and this guy had just killed it in every aspect of business. And I said, hey, what's like the biggest lie that you've seen in the business world? And he said, you know what it is? If you build it, they will come. Where did we get that from? I was like, that is completely false. He said, everyone thinks, oh, if you can just find that $1 million idea, then you'll get rich. He's like, that's just categorically false. Like, that's not what works. He said, when people tell me, hey, I have $1 million idea for you, he says, hey, listen, I don't care. Do you have $1 million marketing plan? And they're like, well, what's that? And he said, okay, no, sorry, I don't do business then. Come back with $1 million marketing plan. I don't care if it's for water, but if you've got $1 million marketing plan for any product, I'm listening.
And that's great. I actually use that all the time. The field of dream syndrome, I call it, right? Build it and they will come never works. And my other one that I like to use is hope is not a strategy. And he is absolutely correct. There's so many situations. I do a lot of mentoring of some of the universities, and I'll be presented with these ideas and they'll go, this thing's a winner and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, did you do any market research? Oh yeah, I talked to my mom and my dad and my sister and my brother and my cousins. They all love it. I said, but did you talk to anybody outside of your family? And the answer is no. And I said, I've got some concerns. And as entrepreneurs, and I'll go including myself, we fall in love with our own ideas. We think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And unless we go out and validate it, it doesn't work. When I first started and again, I won't give you the full history, but started my advertising agency, I was literally just doing what I'm doing now in consulting. And I ended up working for a large, at the time, not really that large, but large, retail consumer products in the fashion industry, targeting teenagers. And I would travel around the country with them, do focus groups. And after 9 years, I went, you know what? I'm listening to guys in the action sports industry say they wish there was more data in the industry. They loved what we're doing. And I went, maybe there's a business here. So I went back to the company I was working for, plus some other people that I met, and said, what if you had this data? And it was like, man, we'd buy it in a second. So I started validating and I launched the study. And I made a mistake when I launched it because I had a target vertical of action sports, but I launched the study in the broader fashion industry. And so big brands bought it, but the other guys didn't. As a matter of fact, there was a brand at the time, they're a little more kind of general now called World Industries, but they literally got up from the meeting and said, until you talk to 2,000 skateboarders, don't come back. And it dawned on me that I was coming at it ass backwards, if you will. And so I literally got abandoned that whole, walked away from brands like Fossil and Swatch and all of them because I wanted to target, the brands in the action sports industry. And I really flipped this thing. And that company went on for, I don't know, 10 years, 13 years. But I validated it before I ever did it. And so even in my own stuff, I think about what are the trends? What are happening? What are people interested in? I give a lot of speeches and presentations and I look at what resonates. My hot one last year, believe it or not, was Google is your number one customer. Well, I'm not a SEO guy. I believe in it. And that all came from working with a luxury watch company. And the owner came to me when I first started working with him and said, who do you think my number one customer is? Well, it's got to be somebody that's got a lot of discretionary dollars because I could buy a watch or I could buy a car. I mean,
right.
And he goes, no, it's Google. And I, it's like, okay. 8 months later, man, I drank the Kool-Aid and, I was out on the stump just talking about Google as your number one customer and things you needed to do. So, but again, that came from the market. I didn't just sit here and come up with it, right? So Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit.
No, it's spot on. I just think it's such a common thing that, I mean, it's probably one of the biggest paradigm shifts that seems to happen inside entrepreneurs. And I was there too, right? My whole life growing up, I was raised in a home where I thought, oh yeah, like if you can just have your $1 million idea, if you can just find that one killer product that solves everyone's problems perfectly, it'll fly off the shelves and you'll be rich and you'll never have to worry about anything again. And another thing that's shockingly common is that people will find $1 million idea, and because they can't market it, they have to take it to some other place. They'll have it for 10 years and no one ever buys it except friends and family, who will give them a solid thumbs up on it. But still, it's not worth much until someone acquires it that knows how to market the thing and actually put it out there. And so they lose most of their, product or most of their market share on that because they didn't know how to market in the first place. And it just seems like that common, that's like the big red pill I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs have to take is nobody cares what you like. Like the market has a will of its own. And so everyone gets those things conflated. Oh, well, I love my product. I know it's going to be killer. And people are like, oh, I had a buddy recently. This guy that I met, and he had this cool product, right? And it was, I mean, I love being proved wrong by entrepreneurs, right? I love being proved wrong. I'm like, I love it if you just succeed and blow up, like that's the greatest thing ever. But he had an idea that I thought, never in a million years I think that would take. And the market he was trying to go was weird. And I'm like, why are you pushing this so hard? He's like, oh, well, I grew up playing baseball. And it was some baseball gimmick thing that he was doing. I grew up playing baseball. I'm like, okay, that's okay. Right there. You have to like watch out. That's the red flag, right? You love this so much. You've got to be really careful now. And the same thing, I said, well, what kind of market research have you done? Tell me what you've learned. What's the market space telling you? He's like, oh, trust me, man. I can sense it. Like, I just know this is gonna go completely bonkers. And I was like, well, I wouldn't invest in you. And I'm like, it's not because I don't think it might totally work, but you have no data to prove that. All you're going is based on a hunch. And I'm like, and trust me, I know that the movies glamorize the hunch, but that's not how the business world, it doesn't work that way. I've seen a lot of hunches that did not work out. So.
Yeah, well, with the advent of really using social media to sell product, it looks easy, right? You can make $1 million. You can, go on TikTok and dance and sell your dancing shoes or whatever it happens to be. But there's a plan and a strategy there. It isn't just on a whim that you're trying to do that. And I call them, probably not PC, but I call them dead bodies. I've had a lot of misfires down the road. There's a lot of litter on my journey that I had ideas and they didn't work. As a matter of fact, my first venture into the entrepreneurial world when I was only 23, and I was working in an agency. We're doing a lot of television commercials, and the guys I was working with over a couple of years convinced me that we could start our own film company, production company. And if you're familiar with, obviously everybody's familiar with Hollywood, right? So, but we're an hour south. We thought we're going to bring Hollywood to Orange County. What did I know? Sounded good to me. In and out in 8 months, lost a boatload of money and, set me back. And, but that was probably one of the better educations I ever had. And I'm glad it happened earlier in my career that, you can't just go blindly and follow people because they said so. And I think that was kind of my early training of, be smart. You went to school for this stuff. Why'd you just blindly follow these guys? They were like 20, 25 years older than me. So of course they knew, of course, they told me that they could have all this business and I believed them. And I think that's, that it's easy to roll out a product. I've done it a few times. I've worked with a lot of companies that had great ideas. There was a guy I did some marketing for him. This was about 8 years ago, double shower head. Now, in a lot of luxury homes, the double shower head, was going for $140 plus. Well, he had invented a shower head that we could sell in Home Depot for $30. And I got really enthusiastic after I did the research. And so I got myself involved, took an equity piece and actually I'm not my job is not selling, but I actually sold 85,000 units to Home Depot. I was so excited. And then it came down to, we need these tests. And it turned out to be, they had never done the test. The guy that said he had the money didn't have the money. And the whole thing imploded. And so there was a viable product. To your point earlier, they didn't have a plan. They didn't have the money to actually make it happen. And so, just having a great idea doesn't necessarily mean, as we've been discussing, it doesn't mean the market's going to buy it. There's a lot of great ideas that never made it, or in some cases got purchased and shelved because, the competitor didn't want it out there. I always encourage the clients to spend time digging into the market.
It's funny you mentioned the dual shower head. Actually, I've got a background in marketing, and so for me, I'm the guy that's hyper aware of every ad I see on my social media and every ad I see on TV. And there has been one that's been killing it, and it's a dual shower head. I've seen it for the last 3 or 4 months.
Oh, how funny!
And it's funny, and it's very well marketed, right? Very, very well marketed, and I think it's called Tandem or something. But it's just funny. I'm like, that's a funny product to push so hard. And it's always interesting to see what I get, because I click on a lot of ads, so I know that some people are paying a lot of money to get in front of me because I buy a lot of stuff off ads too. So I'm like, I know that I'm kind of like, if they're in front of me for months and months on end, they either have a huge budget or it's going well or something. So anyways, it's just kind of funny you say that. It's like, yeah. And it's to the point, right? Sometimes you can have an idea that totally will fly off the shelves, but if you can't market it effectively, you haven't done the research, you've done the homework for it, then you don't really have a business. You just still have just a good idea.
Well, exactly. Perfect.
So I have a question here then. As people are going into new ventures, and most of my audience are podcasters, influencers, content creators, they maybe have something of a brand built up for themselves personally. Mm-hmm. Always the question is, how do we monetize this? How do we take this attention and turn it into dollars? What kind of wisdom would you share with someone who's trying to maybe, I don't know, let's just say they're launching into an energy drink brand or something. How would you tell people to approach getting into the business side, trying to sell products or trying to sell services, and what kind of foundational ideas do you recommend?
Yeah, so a couple things, and I think we might have discussed this, but I'll say I have, but I more had a podcast, mm-hmm. and I had it for a little over 4 years. It still exists. Like, people are still downloading it. I took a 3-month break, and it's been almost 2 years. So
it happens.
At 180 some odd podcasts, and again, long story, but and I think when we talked earlier, when I had the idea and I wanted to do this, it was, I went out and I listened to a lot of podcasts. Mine was a business podcast like this. And I wanted to understand, frankly, who my competition was, what was going on in the market. At the time, I haven't looked at data. At the time, only 13% of all podcasts were business podcasts. So I knew I wasn't competing with the comedies or the true crime and things like that. So, but I also knew I had a smaller sliver of the market. And so looking at, again, probably not as extensive as it should have been, but I wanted to understand where I might niche. And then I'd spent 3 months doing this, coming up with the concept, testing the concept idea with people that I knew in the business world, and said, would you listen to a podcast that was offering this kind of advice? I wanted to make it fun and casual, but hence the name that I came up with. And so I spent a lot of time thinking it through. Probably the one area I probably didn't think through was what kind of time commitment it was going to be. Especially in my sense, I was doing my own recruiting and doing my own vetting, and my podcast went from 20 minutes to 30 minutes to 50 minutes, some cases 90 minutes. And then, started thinking, well, it's just, way too much. People aren't listening to them like that. And so I looked at it as a product. And so I used it to, frankly, market myself as a thought leader, like we're doing, very participatory in the conversation. And I used it strategically to target guests, because I was looking for, hey, if I could get this CEO on it, now he's going to get to know me a little bit. Now I've got him in my database. Now I can outreach. So I used it from a business. I started actually creating my own ads, and running my own ads in my show. So I obviously I'm on your show, right? So I believe in podcasting. It's not that I don't believe in it. For me, it just became a time thing. I wrestle with it all the time about going back and doing it. I get solicited every day. Hey, we'd like to, have this guest on your show. I was like, it just doesn't exist. Now, as far as is developing a new product, I think you have to look at the market that you want to bring it out in. And you mentioned water. Water's a great one. So on my podcast a few years back, I had, and I can't remember her name, but I had the CEO of Hint Water. And her journey to come out with a water brand is pretty significant in the fact that she was competing with mega corporations that had tried to introduce new water brands that failed miserably because the water category is really crowded. And so in her situation is how do you find a niche? And obviously flavored waters and things like that, right? And we see her ads on television, but the reality is that's not how they started, right? They worked the formula, they got the brand, they got it in the bottle. I worked a lot in the alcoholic beverage industry. We always call it, we have it in the bottle. They looked at how they were going to define their positioning. And then they started, distribution. How can they sell? Sometimes it was literally they're, loading them up in the back of their station wagon, if you will, and driving it to the local stores to do stocking. And so they really had a strategic plan to grow it and compete. I'm actually talking to a brand that's in a new tequila, organic tequila. And they've been around, a couple of years. They've got some distribution, but they really targeted a geographic area. They're here in California. He looked at Los Angeles, for example, and the choose, Los Angeles County's massive. The DMA is massive. So they chose San Diego. It's confined, has its own television market and all those kinds of things. So they strategically made a choice in how they were going to do this. I've worked with another tequila brand actually in San Diego over the past several years. We became friends. He's got 10 SKUs and he's still struggling to get one or two on the shelf. And so knowing what it takes to get into distribution, for example, we'll go water, to get into distribution, to, have the Cisco's of the world carry your product, why it's of interest to them, there has to be demand. And so how do you create demand for water? You go out, you have to do sampling, you have to do tastings, you give it away for free. And so you have to build that groundswell. And it's really like anything else. Go back to the apparel industry. I mean, my son, when I was in that industry, wanted to do his own t-shirt line. And so, the bank of dads got together and funded him and his friends, and they created actually a pretty interesting line. Their name was a little sketchy, and it caused some issues, but we got him into distribution. We got him testing it. But then their senior year started and their interest went back to school and girls and sports, and the whole thing fell apart. And, the bank of dads couldn't collect on that debt. But so I guess the advice is, really spend your time and define the market opportunities and understand where you play and what again, you go into a crowded market and there's, 50 water companies. How are you going to steal share when you got maybe a Coca-Cola that I think they're Aquafina or something like that are putting, millions of dollars behind them. And now you've got something with, you can barely get the labels printed. So, you really have to think through. Same thing with apparel. How you and I could have an apparel company tomorrow and have new designs and make t-shirts, and we could sell them online. How do we get into the action sports stores or the San Diegos or the Pac Suns of the world? You just can't walk in and say, hang my shirts up, right? There's a process. They want to know how you're going to market it, how you're going to support it, who are your sponsors. And so, quick story, as one of the mentors I had over at the university, they came up with a subscription shoe business. And their idea was that young girls, high school girls, college girls could rent, if you will, new shoes, rent new shoes, wear them as long as they wanted, and then return them. And then the company would take the shoes and donate them. Interesting model. But
Yeah.
these are the folks I talked about. They asked their mom, their dad, their brother, their sister. They all thought it was a great idea. And they had a small marketing budget, and they hired a PR firm out of New York that was in fashion, ate up their budget like in 30 days. And the whole thing just imploded. Why? Because they ran into some issues about, were you really getting new shoes? What if I was getting something that somebody else wore? How were you, all that stuff started swirling around, and their model was flawed. And yet they didn't really do the due diligence and trying to set that up. So.
Yeah, and something else that comes to mind as well was another piece of advice that I got that was whenever possible, pre-sale. And that's something that,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'd never, so I also had a business where I started it and again, asked the neighbors, asked the friends, and it was selling this cool little widget. I'm like, oh, this thing will just kill. It'll be amazing. Effectively lost like 20 grand right out the gate on that one. And again, it was just bad research. And in my mind, I was so sure of it because I would love that product so much. And the funny thing is, in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I could have known. I just could have pre-sold a whole bunch of, said, hey, coming out soon and at a huge discount, even at cost, pre-sell 1,000 units and just know, oh, here's my cost per conversion or something. No. Ordered all the supply first and just knew that I'd be able to sell it and didn't. So now I've got a whole few big boxes full of these widgets. So anyways, it's just, that's kind of the fun game we always get to play. I have one last question here for you, Angelo. We just touched on this, but I think this would actually be super valuable for the audience. You mentioned that you did 180 episodes as a podcaster, and one of the goals that you had was to meet your clients or your guests, and some of them might potentially turn into clients in the future. With that as an angle, and that's a lot of my own clients. So I produce podcasts for other people and companies. That is a big goal. What lessons did you learn through that process? Or is there any advice you would give, or anything you would say to avoid, or anything you'd say to do?
Yeah, I think so. My mistake was I didn't capture all the contact information, so to speak. I had the exchanges, but I was not building a database. Like you and I would talk, right? And I know I had your email, but I didn't think about putting it into a database so I could market to you later on. And so I, kind of dawned on me halfway through this thing is like, oh my God, you're not collecting this information. And then it turned out to be, it was a major struggle and to put it together. And then I really never did anything with it. So I was more in the moment versus thinking about the future. So that was just I think a huge misstep by me. I've gone back over the years and tried to recapture that. Because I wasn't treating that business like I treat my other business. I mean, I have, I blog, I drink my own Kool-Aid, I have a huge database, I market, I do email newsletters and all this stuff. But for whatever reason, I ignored that side of it.
Yeah.
So I think you have to go in with, what is your focus? Is it to, meet a potential client? Is it to, be able to have a conversation and show that you're a thought leader as well, and then leverage that? Use the transcripts, use the data. I asked a specific question in my first 50 shows. But then I got off it, which was stupid. My original goal was, I'm going to ask this one question in every episode. I'm going to take the information and then I'm going to write a book. That was a goal, and I fell down on it. And so, because I wanted to use the content. And so the content that we have in all of our shows is extremely valuable. And yet, we use our show notes and we stick it up on our websites and we don't do anything with it, then it's useless. And like I just took, for example, we do a lot of blogging. I've been blogging for 10 years. I just took a lot of my content because I had some time and I restructured it actually into a book. And goes like, okay, unless I use this stuff. And so in my newsletters, I'll go back a year or 2 years or 3 years and I'll use podcast notes. I've actually been using old podcasts and putting them in, trying to just, again, regenerate interest in what I was doing. So I think that's an area that that we don't, I use the broad we, we don't think about that, we're just spending whatever, an hour together, and you put it up, you run it, and nothing else happens to it. It's a 1-episode deal, and that's the end of it. Right. So how can you leverage what we're doing today into something that continues? Because, we write a blog and we post a blog and we go, it's one and done. It's not. You can, reutilize, re-nurture it. The one blog I can't repost is the one that was in the middle of COVID, talking about what you should do in COVID, right? That has no value anymore. Some of the pieces do, but that actual blog doesn't. So to me, it's about thinking about every episode, every blog, every post is how do you use this content and reuse this content? Because that's extremely valuable to us as marketers, because it helps position and it creates that thought leadership. Like I ventured into this year more into the M&A world and working with private equity and things like that. I got myself on some panels. I moderated a group. I've been doing a lot of AI talks. Why? Because those are hot topics that I'm seeing. And so I'm immersing myself into that, trying to open up a new market opportunity for myself. But that came not because I had a whim. It came because I've been watching trends. I've been listening to other people talk, with the baby boomer generation that own a lot of businesses. They all want to get out.
Right.
And so there's going to be a lot of businesses that are being sold. Even then, is there an opportunity for someone to say, I would like to get into whatever, manufacturing business or the apparel business. Can I find a business I can buy instead of starting it? That's the beauty of franchises, right? I tried that one too for about 6 months, and that was a mistake. But I'm not sure I answered the question because I went off on a tangent, and I apologize.
No, we love tangents.
I think that, yeah. So, I always encourage people to step back, put it on paper. As I tell my own children, write your pros and your cons, really think about it. Don't chase the money, right? The money will come if you've got a solid plan and a solid idea. There's a stat that I use that 90% of all strategies fail due to poor implementation. So having a great strategy is extremely important, right? Hope is not a strategy, as we said earlier. But if you don't implement it correctly or follow through on your implementation, because consistency and persistency and is where we tend to fall down, right? It's like, I got to do this again. The weekly podcast, and, it's like, I can't. Well, look at me. I took a break because I was tired of doing them. And, now I'm 2 years later. And so, did I have a misstep by walking away from mine? I don't know yet, because I'd still, again, utilize it in some of my newsletters and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
But that was probably the biggest mistake, was not capturing and really utilizing the content and the relationships that I made. I'm not saying I didn't do some of them, but not as many as I should have.
Awesome. I could not agree more. Angelo, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For those that are trying to contact you, maybe for some marketing direction, maybe they want to hire you as a fractional CMO, how can they go about getting in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably LinkedIn. That'll have all my information on there, links to my website. And on my website, there's all the blogs. There's the podcasts are actually on the website. I have a lot of free resources, how to conduct a competitive analysis, book on storytelling, have a small mini marketing course that's kind of a taste tester, if you will, that I did, and it's free. So there's a lot of stuff up there. I'm a believer in giving back. That's what one of my bosses many years ago told me. He said, someday you'll be in a situation where you can help and educate and, bring along the new generation. So, that's what I like to do. That's why I mentor and all that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. And what was the website's name again?
My website is called craftmarketingandbranding.com.
Cool. Thank you for listening to another episode. I'm so grateful for your support. If anything on this show was valuable to you, I have one huge ask. That's just share it with your friends. And if you have a little extra time, go ahead and leave me a review. That's my big ask for you guys. We'll see you on the next episode.